This passage from Isaiah is one of those passages that people like to quote when trying to lift up other people. I, the Lord, have called you for the victory of justice. I have actually sent this to people. I said, God has a plan for you. God has called you for the victory of justice. And I always said it, or usually said it, without regard to what God was calling them to. So if they said, I want to do something, or, I wrote this one time to a seminarian. I said, God has called you to the victory of justice. But if we read this passage, first of all, this is speaking about Jesus. So it is foreshadowing Jesus who fulfills this. But we who have been baptized into Jesus, this now applies to us in our life. And so we can say, here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one with whom I am well pleased. We can apply that to ourselves so long as we are following God's vocation for us in our life. So long as we are following God's will in this specific moment. And so it sounds great. Look at this. God's going to uphold me. He's going to take me by the hand. Through me, he's going to bring forth justice to the nations. Not crying out, not shouting. Gosh, you mean I'm not allowed to complain? I'm not allowed to kind of, poor me. And that is what it means. All right? Jesus came, and a bruised reed he would not break, and a smoldering wick he would not quench. In other words, Jesus was gentle and meek and humble of heart. And I have to be able to imitate him if I am to read this as applying to me in my life. And so, I, the Lord, have called you for the victory of justice. This isn't my victory. This is God's victory. God wants us to participate in his victory, which means we do his will. We can see an example of this in our gospel. Jesus is there. They're, serving this big dinner. Martha, as is her type, she's working and she's serving the meal. And Mary comes in and she takes this perfume and she anoints his feet and then dries it with her hair. Very scandalous, by the way. Very scandalous. And Judas, he complains that she didn't do something else with the money or the oil. He's not following God's will. Mary is. And what happens? Judas is critiqued or criticized by Jesus and basically told to shut up. All right? But the fragrance, this is just so beautiful. All right? Where does it say this? Where did I miss? Thank you. She anointed the feet of Jesus and dried them with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. This is a good question that we can ask ourselves. Is my life filled with the fragrance of these things that I do in Jesus Christ? Is my home filled with the fragrance of me doing God's will in my family? Or is the house filled with this, stink of my criticism, similar to that of Lazarus? Are my friendships? Is my place of work? Is it filled with this fragrance of doing God's will? Or is it stinky with that putrid smell of self-justification or fear or self-righteousness or, gossip or complaining? We are called to God's victory of justice. God has formed us and set us as a covenant to the people, to be a light to the nations, to open the eyes of the blind, to bring prisoners out of confinement, and from the judgment those who live in darkness. We are called to do this and be this, but we can only do it if we are doing God's will.